Ubreen. They said he would never have the courage to face the world. But in that hallway, silence turned into a battlefield. 3 boys laughed, and she, the poor Nanny, raised her body before them like a shield. When the millionaire arrived and saw the scene, no one imagined what he would do in the next seconds, a gesture that would change everything, forever. The halls of the Windsor Academy of Boston were cold, polished to a gleam that reflected the emptiness in the indifferent gazes. In this universe where last names were worth more than handshakes, little Leo, just 5 years old, shrank in his wheelchair, wishing he had the power of invisibility. The partial paralysis that froze half his face and tied his tongue in knots was an easy target, a daily spectacle for the childish cruelty that echoed off the imported marble. "Look at the freak, he can't even talk right." A boy's voice rang out, sharp as broken glass. The laughter that followed was a wave that threatened to drown Leo in his own shame. He squeezed his eyes shut, hoping the darkness would save him, that the world would disappear. But that morning, something was different. A woman's voice, firm and smooth as velvet, broke through the barrier of scorn. "Stop it, now." Clara, the new nanny, stood before the wheelchair, her arms spread like the wings of a guardian angel. Her uniform, simple and visibly worn, contrasted with the designer clothes of the other children, but her posture was that of a queen defending her kingdom. The silence that fell was heavy, dense, charged with surprise and defiance. It was at that exact moment that Arthur Covington arrived, a man sculpted by power, whose Italian suit seemed more like armor against the world. His mind, accustomed to calculating the cash flow of his businesses and the returns on his stock market investments, was not prepared for the scene unfolding. He, a self-made multimillionaire who built a fortune from nothing, who commanded boardrooms with a single raised eyebrow, felt the ground vanish beneath his leather shoes. There was a dignity in that woman, a quiet courage that asked for no applause, that disarmed him completely. He saw the fear in his son's eyes being replaced by a glimmer of hope as he looked at Clara's back. For a moment, the image of his late wife, always so strong, flashed in his memory, an old wound that had never healed. Arthur moved, his body acting before his brain processed the decision. His imposing presence made the bullies retreat as if pushed by an unseen force. He didn't say a word to them. His icy glare was enough. Then he stopped in front of Clara, whose heart was pounding. She turned slowly, expecting a reprimand, perhaps even to be fired for causing a scene. Their eyes met, hers, brown and full of defiant apprehension, his, blue as a winter ocean, unreadable. Time seemed to freeze. The voices around them, the hurried footsteps, all dissolved into a distant hum. The world was reduced to that hallway, to that silent confrontation between 2 different universes. In a gesture that defied all logic and the social etiquette that governed his life, Arthur took off his own suit jacket, the expensive, perfectly tailored fabric, and gently placed it over Clara's shoulders. The unexpected weight of the coat, still warm from his body, made her shiver. The subtle scent of an exclusive cologne enveloped her, a luxury she had never imagined experiencing so closely. The gesture was so intimate, so inexplicable, that the air grew thin. She lifted her face, her lips parted in a silent question, and saw something in his expression that both frightened and drew her in. A raw vulnerability, a glimpse of the man behind the armor of his immense wealth. His hand still hovered in the air, inches from her shoulder, as if he himself were shocked by what he had just done. The hallway, once a stage for humiliation, had transformed into a sanctuary of silence, and all eyes were fixed on them, witnessing the impossible. What did that gesture mean? Was it a prize, a protection, or something else entirely, something neither of them could yet name? The shrill sound of the school bell broke the spell, and the hallway suddenly roared back to life. Children ran, voices overlapped, and the moment of vulnerable quiet shattered into 1,000 pieces. Clara felt her face burn under the curious stares that were now fixed on her, no longer with contempt, but with a perplexity that was almost as uncomfortable. The weight of Arthur's jacket on her shoulders seemed to increase with every second, a luxury item that marked her as a target. She instinctively tried to take it off, to return it, but his hand rose, a subtle gesture that stopped her. "Leave it. It's cold," he murmured, his voice deep and controlled, as if he were commenting on the weather and not the emotional hurricane he had just unleashed. Among the crowd of students and parents, Clara noticed a particularly sharp pair of eyes fixed on them. It was Beatrice, one of the school's veteran teachers, known for her friendship with the Covington family. There was a mix of shock and disapproval in her gaze that sent a chill down Clara's spine, a premonition that this gesture would have consequences. The drive back to the mansion on Beacon Hill was an exercise in tense silence. Arthur drove his imported sedan with fierce concentration, his hands tight on the wheel, his knuckles white. His mind, a precise machine trained to analyze stock charts and predict crypto market fluctuations, was malfunctioning. He felt like a fool. What had possessed him to do that? An impulse, a primitive reaction to protect the one who protected his son. But gestures like that were not part of his repertoire. His life was governed by logic, by numbers, by the steady growth of a net worth that was already in the billions. Feelings were liabilities, a bad investment. He glanced at the rearview mirror and saw Leo in the back seat, his head resting against the window, a tiny, serene smile on his face. Beside him, Clara sat rigidly, the expensive jacket enveloping her small frame like an ill-fitting hug. She looked as out of place in the car's luxury as he felt inside his own skin at that moment. Clara, for her part, barely dared to breathe. The jacket's fabric was soft against her skin, and his scent was both intoxicating and intimidating. It was the smell of an unreachable world, a world of expensive dinners, European vacations, and discussions about the price of gold and market futures. She thought of her sick mother, the rent due next week, the grocery list that was stripped down to the essentials. That jacket was probably worth more than 3 months of her salary. She felt like an imposter, a fraud wearing the skin of another social class. The silence in the car was so thick she could almost touch it. Every second dragged on, magnifying the social distance between them, even though they were less than a yard apart. She needed to say something, to break the tension, but the words wouldn't come. What could she possibly say to a man who commanded a business empire and whose fortune was news in financial magazines? "Thank you for the jacket" felt too trivial. "I'm sorry for the trouble" sounded like a confession of guilt, so she remained silent, praying for the drive to end. When the car finally stopped at the imposing gates of the mansion, Arthur turned off the engine but made no move to get out. The silence deepened for another moment, becoming almost unbearable. He turned to her, and for the first time that day, their eyes met without an audience. The blue was intense, stormy, and Clara felt a shiver. She thought he would fire her right there, tell her she had crossed some invisible line. He opened his mouth to speak, but his gaze dropped for a second, landing on her shoes, worn at the sides from constant use. His eyes then returned to her face, his expression shifting to something she couldn't decipher. It wasn't pity, but a sort of calculated intensity, as if he were solving a complex equation. "Clara," he said, his voice low and firm, "starting tomorrow, consider yourself to have an unlimited advance on your salary. Take what you need, for whatever you need. Just inform my accountant." He didn't wait for a response. He opened the door and got out, leaving her in the silence of the car, her heart hammering against her ribs. With an offer that sounded more like a decree, a mystery that left her even more confused and frightened than before. Clara remained motionless in the quiet car for a long time, the echo of Arthur's words reverberating in her mind. Unlimited advance. The phrase sounded absurd, dangerous. It wasn't a gesture of kindness, she felt. It was a demonstration of power, a way of putting a price tag on her loyalty, on her affection for Leo. It was his way of solving a problem that money shouldn't touch. With trembling hands, she removed the jacket from her shoulders. The fabric still held his warmth, a warmth that now felt suffocating. She folded it with reverent care, as if handling an artifact from a strange world, and left it on the soft leather seat. Getting out of the car, she felt the cool afternoon air on her arms, a welcome relief that brought her back to her own reality. She gathered her things, her cheap purse and heavy heart, and went to help Leo out of the vehicle, her face impassive, a mask for the storm brewing inside her. That offered capital wasn't a solution. It was a new kind of prison. Inside the mansion, while helping Leo with his afternoon snack, the boy did something that surprised her. He reached out his little hand, the one he had more control over, and touched her arm. His expressive eyes looked at her with deep gratitude. In a tremendous effort, his lips moved, and a hoarse, aspirated sound came out. "Clara!" It was the first time he had tried to say her name. Clara's heart melted, and for an instant she forgot about his father, the offer, the jacket, and the chasm between their worlds. That small sound was the only wealth that mattered. She smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her tired face. "That's right, my little warrior, I'm Clara." The pure joy of that moment reinforced her conviction. She was there for him, and no amount of money, no fortune could buy the sincerity of that bond. Meanwhile, in his glass-walled office overlooking the garden, Arthur tried to focus on the stock market quotes blinking across his multiple screens. But the numbers danced meaninglessly. The image of Clara's shocked face when he made the offer haunted him. It was a mistake, he knew. A clumsy move, typical of someone who believes all problems can be solved with a healthy cash flow. He was a master at managing assets and liabilities, at turning investments into profit. But human relationships were an unknown territory, a kind of treasure map he had lost long ago. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. That impulse in the school hallway had destabilized him, cracking open a fissure in his carefully constructed armor. And now, with that disastrous offer, he felt he had only made things worse. The phone on his desk rang, the sound cutting through the silence. He answered with his usual cool efficiency. "Arthur Covington." The voice on the other end was syrupy, almost cloying. "Arthur, darling, it's Beatrice. I'm sorry to call like this, unannounced, but I just had to know if you were both all right after that dreadful scene this morning." Arthur pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling a headache begin to form. Beatrice continued, not waiting for a response. "I was so impressed with your employee's attitude. Such remarkable courage. But, darling, and I say this as your friend, you must be careful. People from such different backgrounds, sometimes they can mistake kindness for opportunity. Your generosity is immense, but it can be seen as a target." Every word was coated in false concern, a poisonous insinuation disguised as advice. The seed of doubt was planted. Arthur, who lived in a world where everyone wanted a piece of his fortune, felt a familiar chill. He thanked her curtly and hung up, his jaw tight. The irritation gave way to a deep unease. He stood up and walked to the window. Outside, in the vast garden, he saw Clara pushing Leo's wheelchair across the lawn. The boy was pointing at a butterfly, and his laugh, a rare and precious sound, reached Arthur through the glass. The scene was the picture of innocence, but now Beatrice's words echoed in his mind, tainting the purity of that moment. Was it all a well-calculated act? The defense in the hallway, the affection for Leo, was it all a shrewd investment by someone aiming for his fortune? The warmth he had felt for a brief moment was replaced by the ice of suspicion, and his gaze on the woman playing with his son became hard and inquisitive. Night fell on the Covington mansion, but it brought no peace to Clara. Every shadow in the luxurious hallways seemed to mock her, whispering about the offer that hung in the air like an unsolicited debt. She put Leo to bed, reading him a story in the calmest voice she could muster. But her heart was an anvil in her chest. She couldn't accept it. It wasn't pride. It was self-worth. Accepting that money would be like admitting that the kindness she felt for Leo was a service to be bought, a commodity. It would validate the suspicion she already felt in the eyes of people like Beatrice, the teacher. With her decision made, she took a deep breath, the air feeling thin and insufficient, and walked down the spiral staircase. The light from Arthur's office was the only one on the ground floor, a solitary strip under the solid wood door. She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the cold handle, before gathering the courage that defined her and knocking softly. Arthur was immersed in complex charts, trying to find a pattern in the volatility of a new cryptocurrency that promised high returns. But his mind was elsewhere. Clara's silent refusal to even mention his offer intrigued him. In his world, people didn't refuse money, they negotiated for more. The knock on the door startled him. "Come in," Clara entered, closing the door behind her. She didn't look at the wealth around her, the art on the walls, the rare books, the mahogany desk that was worth more than a car. Her eyes fixed directly on him. "Mr. Covington, with all due respect, I cannot accept your offer from earlier today." Her voice was quiet but firm, without a trace of hesitation. Arthur leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers steepled on the desk. The suspicion Beatrice had planted in him bubbled to the surface. "Is it not enough? I can increase the amount. Consider it an investment in your well-being, which will result in better care for my son." The use of the word investment wounded her deeply, but she didn't show it. "It's not about the amount, sir. My job is to care for Leo, and I do it with all my heart. That affection doesn't have a price. If I accepted, I would feel like I was selling something that should be given freely." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I need this job. I need my salary, and I am very grateful for it. But my dignity is not included in the contract. I ask you to understand." The silence that followed was profound. Arthur watched her, analyzing her as he would an asset report. She wasn't bluffing. There was no artifice in her eyes, only a disarming sincerity. For the first time in years, he felt completely lost. The rules of his universe did not apply to this woman. Her refusal made no sense on any profit and loss spreadsheet. It was an anomalous data point that destabilized his entire equation. To break the tension, he changed the subject, his voice softer. "Tomorrow is Leo's session with Dr. Evans. I'd like to go." Clara was surprised. The older staff had mentioned that he never accompanied his son to therapy. She simply nodded. The next day, the atmosphere was different. The drive to the clinic was quiet, but it wasn't the same tense silence as before. It was a silence of observation, of reassessment. The clinic was a welcoming space, with colorful walls and educational toys. Dr. Evans, a woman with a kind smile and a sharp gaze, greeted them and began the session with Leo. Arthur sat in a corner, feeling like an outsider. He watched Clara interact with his son and the therapist, her presence calm and encouraging. At one point, Dr. Evans picked up some animal figures. "Leo, let's try again. Which one is this?" She showed him a picture of a cat. Leo struggled, the muscles in his face tensing. A frustrated sound escaped his lips. His eyes filled with tears. Clara knelt beside him, took his hand, and whispered, "It's okay, my warrior. Take a deep breath, you can do it." The boy looked at her, trust replacing the fear in his eyes. He took a deep breath, just as she had taught him. Dr. Evans then took a photo from her bag. It was a picture of Clara. She placed it in front of Leo and asked softly, "And who is this, sweetie?" Arthur leaned forward, his heart inexplicably racing. Leo looked at the photo, then at Clara's face beside him. His lips moved, and with a clarity that shocked everyone in the room, he pronounced the word that would change everything. Clara. Dr. Evans looked at Arthur, her eyes shining. Mr. Covington, this is a breakthrough. It's the first time he said a name. His emotional connection to her. It's the key to his progress. The word floated in the air of the therapy room, simple yet monumental. Clara. Arthur felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. An impact that left him breathless and, strangely, alive. The sound of his son's voice, shaping a name with a clarity he had never heard before, was a shockwave that rattled the foundations of his self-controlled world. The ice he had cultivated around his heart for years began to crack, and beneath it, a raw, powerful emotion threatened to overflow. It was a mixture of overwhelming joy and searing guilt. He had been so busy accumulating a net worth in dollars and euros, so focused on turning capital into more capital, that he had missed the most precious sound in the world, his son's voice. And it wasn't he, the father, the billionaire, who had unlocked that door. It was her, the simple woman with worn shoes and an unshakable dignity. He looked at Clara, whose eyes were misty with tears, but who had a radiant smile on her face. She was holding Leo's hand, celebrating his victory as if it were her own. In that moment, all the suspicions sown by Beatrice seemed venomous and absurd. The connection Dr. Evans mentioned was visible, palpable. It wasn't a strategy, it was love, a pure, selfless love that he, with all his fortune, had not known how to give. The therapist continued to speak, explaining the implications of this breakthrough, but Arthur barely heard her. His attention was fixed on the scene before him. The woman he had crudely tried to compensate financially was now giving him, for free, the greatest wealth he could ever receive. Shame hit him with full force. He felt small, poor in spirit. A man who understood interest rates and dividends but was illiterate in matters of the heart. The ride home was marked by a new kind of silence, a silence filled with unsaid words, with newly discovered emotions. Arthur couldn't take his eyes off Clara in the rearview mirror. He saw the way she fixed Leo's hair, how her gaze was always gentle, and along with the tenderness beginning to sprout in his chest came fear, an old, familiar fear. The fear of getting attached, of feeling again the pain of loss that had haunted him since his wife's passing. This new feeling for Clara, this admiration that was turning into something warmer and more dangerous, was a risk his instincts told him not to take. Protecting his net worth was easy. Protecting his heart was a high-risk investment with few guaranteed returns. Clara, in turn, felt the shift in the atmosphere. Arthur's gaze on her was no longer that of an employer evaluating an employee, nor that of a suspicious rich man. There was something else, an intensity that made her nervous, and, to her own surprise, a little hopeful. She noticed the conflict in his eyes, the battle between ice and fire. She knew instinctively that he was closing himself off again, frightened by his own vulnerability, and she understood that the more he tried to shield himself from this nascent feeling, the more little Leo, who was finally finding his voice, was at risk of being silenced by his father's loneliness. She looked at the boy, who had fallen asleep in the back seat, his face finally at peace. She would do anything to protect that peace. Even if it meant facing the wall of ice, Arthur was rebuilding around himself. When they arrived at the mansion, Arthur did something that surprised her. Instead of going straight to his office, he opened the door for her and Leo. As she prepared to get the boy out of the car, his hand brushed against hers by accident. The contact was brief, a glancing touch of skin, but an electric current passed between them, undeniable and potent. They both pulled back as if they'd been burned. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to stop for a second. There was a question in his eyes and a fear in hers. Without a word, Arthur stepped away abruptly, the mask of coldness returning to his face. "Get Leo ready for dinner," he said, his voice controlled, and turned his back, striding toward the safe refuge of his office. Clara stood there, her heart pounding, feeling the phantom warmth of his hand on hers. That accidental touch had opened a door, and now both of them were terrified of what might be on the other side. The days that followed were a delicate, silent dance around an invisible fire. Arthur, frightened by his own vulnerability, tried to maintain a professional distance, but his eyes betrayed him. Clara would catch him watching her with an intensity that made her blush, gazes that would quickly avert when noticed. He began to appear more often. Instead of locking himself in his office, he would have breakfast with Leo and Clara, listening silently to their conversation. He accompanied them to another doctor's appointment and, to everyone's surprise, spent an entire afternoon in the garden, watching from afar as Clara taught Leo how to hold a colored pencil. She made him smile, not a loud, open laugh, but discreet, almost reluctant smiles that softened the hardness of his face. They were small, everyday moments, but they wove an invisible and strong thread between the three of them, transforming the cold mansion into something that looked dangerously like a home. This new proximity, however, did not go unnoticed. Beatrice, the teacher, who harbored an old and poorly disguised hope of becoming the new Mrs. Covington, saw Clara's growing influence as a direct threat. Her friendship with the school's headmistress gave her access and credibility, and she used it to her advantage. It started subtly, with comments planted in casual conversations. "It's impressive how quickly the new nanny has adapted, don't you think? Arthur seems like a different person," she would say to a group of mothers at the school gate. "She must have some special talent. Some people just know how to please." A true application of her talents to secure a better future. The words were like poisonous seeds, sown in fertile ground. The gossip spread through the school hallways and the social circles Arthur frequented, growing and distorting with each new telling. The narrative was simple and cruel. The poor, ambitious nanny was using the disabled child to seduce the billionaire father. Clara began to feel the change in the air. The smiles from the other mothers became forced, their gazes filled with judgment. She overheard a snippet of conversation in the hallway. Two women whispering about gold digging and being an opportunist. The humiliation hit her like a slap. Her instinct was to pull away, to create a barrier between herself and Arthur, to protect herself and, most importantly, Leo. She began to avoid the family moments, to be more formal, to rebuild the wall that his smile had begun to demolish. Arthur, immersed in his own emotional turmoil, noticed the change, but interpreted it as rejection, which only heightened his fear and made him retreat even further. The delicate dance became a minefield of misunderstandings. The scandal erupted on a Thursday afternoon. The headmistress, a woman who valued a family's assets more than their values, called Arthur for an urgent and private meeting. Clara took Leo to his music class and, as she passed the headmistress's office, the slightly ajar door allowed her to hear Beatrice's voice, laden with false concern. "And Leo's emotional well-being, Arthur. The other children are talking. Your family's reputation and the school's. This situation with the nanny is becoming untenable." Clara felt the floor disappear. She stopped, her heart hammering in her ears, and then she heard Arthur's response. She expected a defense, a firm word that would protect her from the slander, but what came was silence. A long, heavy silence that lasted an eternity. And then, his voice, controlled and distant. "I will handle this situation." Handle? The word broke her. To him, she was a situation, a problem to be managed, a liability on his emotional balance sheet. His silence in the face of the accusation was a knife in her chest, more painful than any insult. She didn't wait to hear more. With tears blinding her vision, she walked away, the echo of that single word, handle, destroying the fragile castle of hope she had begun to build. She wasn't part of the family. She was just a piece in the complex business that was Arthur Covington's life. and apparently her contract was about to be terminated. The walk back from the headmistress's office was the longest of Clara's life. Each step was heavy, as if she were walking on the bottom of the sea. The word handle haunted her, a cold stamp on her forehead. That afternoon, something inside her broke. The light in her eyes went out, replaced by an opaque fog of resignation. She continued to perform her duties with robotic efficiency. Leo's bath, dinner, the bedtime story. But the soul of her actions was gone. Her voice, once full of melody and encouragement, became a monotone thread. Her smiles no longer reached her eyes. She became a ghost in the house, a functional but empty presence. And Leo, with the heightened sensitivity of one who lives more with the heart than with words, felt the change immediately. The light that guided him had dimmed, and he felt lost in the dark. He would try to catch her eye, but Clara would look away, afraid he would see the pain that was drowning her. He stopped trying to form words, as if the source of his courage had dried up along with her joy. Arthur arrived home that night feeling like a coward. His silence in the headmistress's office hadn't been in agreement with the accusations, but the result of a paralyzing shock, the reflex of a man accustomed to postponing emotional confrontations. He had planned to talk to Clara, to explain himself in his own awkward, analytical way. But when he walked in, he was met with a glacial silence that had nothing to do with the usual peace of the house. The atmosphere was thin, heavy. He found Clara in the playroom, putting away puzzle pieces with methodical precision. "Clara," he began, his voice sounding strange in the tense environment. She turned, and her gaze struck him. It was a polite, distant look, the look of a stranger. "Yes, Mr. Covington?" The Mr. was a glass wall erected between them. He wanted to explain, to say he didn't believe the gossip, but the words got tangled in his throat, trapped by a lifetime of pride. "Is dinner ready?" was all he could manage. "Yes, sir. It has been for a few minutes." She turned and left the room, leaving him there, surrounded by the colorful toys that seemed to mock the absence of joy. The turning point came during dinner. The table, usually a place of small interactions, and Leo's slow progress, was a field of silence. Arthur tried to make small talk. Clara answered in monosyllables, and Leo just pushed his food from one side of his plate to the other, his gaze lost. In a desperate attempt to salvage a shred of normality, Arthur picked up Leo's cup. "Son, want some juice? Say juice, come on." It was a word Leo had already been babbling, but the boy didn't respond. He looked up, his gaze moving from his father's tense face to Clara's devastated countenance, who kept her head down. The child's anguish was palpable. He saw the pain in his protector and associated it with the man in front of him. His small shoulders slumped. Slowly, he shook his head. No. And then, in a gesture that broke Arthur's heart into a million pieces, Leo used his hands to push his wheelchair backward, away from the table, away from him. It was a silent repudiation, but more devastating than any scream. In that instant, Arthur understood everything. It wasn't the rumors, the reputation, or the opinions of others. It was him, his hesitation, his stupid pride, his inability to defend the woman who had given his son back his voice, was now taking that very voice away. He had poisoned the only oasis of happiness Leo had ever known. Guilt crushed him, a physical force that stole his breath. The value of his stocks, his investment funds, his entire multi-billion-dollar empire. It was all dust compared to the ruin he had caused in this small universe of 3 people. He looked at Clara, who now had silent tears streaming down her face. She didn't need to say anything. The broken look in his son's eyes said it all. He stood up from the table, the sound of his chair scraping against the floor, echoing like a gunshot in the silence. He couldn't fix this with an order or a check. He needed something more. He needed to understand. On impulse, he grabbed his car keys, Clara looked up, surprised and confused. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice a whisper. He didn't answer. He just walked toward the door, driven by a desperate urgency. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do, but he knew where he needed to go. He needed to see her world, to understand how to fix his own. Arthur drove aimlessly for a few minutes, the car's powerful engine a low hum that contrasted with the cacophony in his mind. The image of his son pushing himself away was a photograph seared into his retina. He wasn't a father. He was a provider who had failed in his most basic duty, protecting his child's happiness. He finally entered an address into the GPS, one he had asked his head of security for weeks ago, for a reason he had then called protocol, but which he now understood was a nascent curiosity. Revere. The lights of the wealthy city gave way to simpler streets, to buildings without doormen, and to houses with small, well-tended yards. He stopped in front of a modest house with a low wall and an iron gate. A warm, yellow light shone from the living room window. This was Clara's world. The contrast with his fortress of glass and concrete on Beacon Hill was stark. Here, life seemed to happen closer to the ground, more real. He stayed in the car for a long time, feeling like an intruder, a voyeur. He was about to start the car and leave when the front door opened. A young woman with the same kind eyes as Clara came out to get some clothes from the line. Soon after, a tired-looking man with a smile on his face arrived on a motorcycle, kissed the woman, and went inside. Arthur watched lights turn on and off, heard the distant sound of laughter. It was a scene of simple domesticity, of a life built not on the profitability of financial investments, but on affection and partnership. He imagined Clara there, amidst that simplicity, and understood that her strength was not an anomaly, but the root of her existence. She didn't need his fortune. She already possessed a wealth of a different kind, one he didn't know how to measure. The dignity he so admired wasn't a posture, it was the foundation of her home. Inside the mansion, Clara tried to calm Leo, who refused to sleep. The boy was agitated, his eyes constantly searching the door, waiting for a return that Clara wasn't sure would happen. She held him, feeling his small, trembling body against hers. "It's going to be okay, my little warrior," she whispered, but the words sounded hollow even to her. Arthur's abrupt departure had left her in a limbo of uncertainty. Would he fire her? Send her away tonight? The anguish was a knot in her throat. She thought of her mother, whose health depended on the medicine her salary bought. She thought of her sister and brother-in-law, who sacrificed so much to care for her. Her job wasn't a whim, it was her family's lifeline. And now, because of feelings she shouldn't have nurtured, because of a closeness she shouldn't have allowed, everything was at risk. Arthur returned late that night. The house was almost completely dark. He entered silently and went upstairs. The door to Leo's room was ajar. He peeked inside, and the scene he saw paralyzed him. Clara had fallen asleep in an armchair next to the boy's bed, her head lolled to the side, her face marked by exhaustion and dried tears. One of her hands still held Leo's small hand, who was finally sleeping peacefully. The sight of that silent devotion, of that care that persisted even after the humiliation and pain, was the final sledgehammer against the wall of ice around his heart. Everything shattered, the arrogance, the pride, the fear. All that was left was a man devastated by his own stupidity, standing before a woman who represented everything he had lost and everything he desperately needed. He approached without a sound, his chest tight. The desire to touch her, to brush a strand of hair from her face, was almost unbearable. But he didn't have that right. Instead, he went to his own room, got the softest blanket he owned, a cashmere one worth a small fortune, and returned. With infinite care, he covered her, the expensive fabric draped over her simple uniform, an echo of the gesture with the jacket on that first day. But this time, the intention was completely different. It wasn't an impulse, nor a show of power. It was an act of reverence, a silent apology, a promise. He stood there, watching her sleep for a long time, and he knew what he had to do. It wouldn't be easy, and words would not be enough. He would have to demolish the man he was, to build the one his son, and perhaps she deserved. The night was far from over, and he knew that in the morning a new and difficult journey would begin. Clara awoke with a start, her mind still fuzzy from a deep and dreamless sleep. The first thing she noticed was the unusual weight and extraordinary softness of what was covering her. It wasn't her thin cardigan, which she always left on the back of the armchair. It was a pearl grey blanket, so light and warm, it felt like it was woven from clouds. She touched it with her fingertips, instinctively recognizing the texture of a luxury that was light years away from her reality. Confused, she looked around. Leo was sleeping soundly in his bed, his chest rising and falling in a serene rhythm. The morning light filtered through the gaps in the curtains, and then she heard it. A strange sound coming from downstairs. Not the familiar noise of the cook starting breakfast preparations, but clumsy, metallic sounds, as if someone were fighting a battle with the pots and pans. Her heart quickened. Careful not to wake Leo, she folded the expensive blanket, placing it at the foot of the armchair as if it were a museum piece, and tiptoed downstairs. The scene in the kitchen left her speechless. Arthur, the man whose business empire was legendary and whose net worth was the subject of speculation in financial magazines, was standing in front of the espresso machine with a look of profound bewilderment, as if trying to decipher hieroglyphics. There was coffee powder spilled on the marble counter and a small puddle of water on the floor. He wasn't wearing his impeccable suit, but a simple cotton shirt and dark pants, which made him look younger, more approachable, and incredibly out of his element. He saw her standing in the doorway, and his face contorted into a mixture of embarrassment and determination. "Good morning. I was trying to make coffee." The confession sounded almost like an apology. He gave up on the machine and turned to her, his blue eyes stripped of their usual armor. There were dark circles under them, indicating he hadn't slept. "Clara, we need to talk," he said, his voice low and serious. "About yesterday, at the school." She felt a chill, bracing for the final blow. "My silence. It wasn't because I agreed with what Beatrice said. It was the silence of a coward. A man who knows how to turn an investment into profit, but doesn't know how to defend what really matters." He paused, and the vulnerability in his gaze was so raw she had to look away. "I spent all night thinking, and I realized that the inheritance I'm building for Leo isn't made of stocks or gold. It's made of memories, of values, and I failed to give him the most important thing, an example of courage." He took a step toward her. "I am so sorry. I am sorry for the pain my weakness caused you, and for the pain it caused my son." The words hit her, disarming her completely. She had expected to be fired, not a confession. "Mr. Covington," she began, her voice trembling. I was scared. For Leo, and for my job, my family." He interrupted her gently. "You don't have to be scared. Not anymore. I'm going to fix this. Today." The determination in his voice was palpable. "Today, I will take Leo to school myself, and I'm going to have a conversation with the headmistress and with Beatrice. This ends here." The thought of a confrontation terrified her, but there was something in his posture, a new strength that didn't come from his wealth but from a newfound conviction that calmed her. For the first time, she felt she wasn't alone in this fight. An hour later, Arthur was in the school hallway, holding Leo's hand, who was seated in his wheelchair. He didn't look for the headmistress. His target was someone else. He saw Beatrice near the teacher's lounge, laughing with a colleague. Her laughter died when she saw him approach. Her expression shifted to a calculated smile of welcome, but Arthur gave her no time. He stopped a few feet from her, his gaze as cold as steel. Leo, beside him, held his hand tighter. Arthur didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The power he emanated was absolute, but now it was power with a moral purpose. "Beatrice," he said, his voice dangerously calm, cutting through the air and silencing everyone around them. "You and we're going to have a talk in the headmistress's office now." The air in the headmistress's office was thin, thick with tension. The headmistress, a woman accustomed to managing the vanities of wealthy families, was a mess of nervous smiles, offering coffee, water, anything to appease the man whose fortune represented a significant portion of the school's annual donations. Beatrice sat in the chair opposite Arthur, trying to project an image of offended confidence, but the subtle tremor in her hands betrayed her. Leo remained by his father's side, a silent observer and the moral center of this impromptu tribunal. Arthur didn't touch the coffee. He placed his hands on his knees, the calm gesture of a predator who knows its prey has nowhere to run. "I won't take much of your time," he began, his voice level, addressing the headmistress, but keeping his eyes locked on Beatrice. "My son's progress is, at this moment, the most important investment of my life. Every word he learns, every small step forward, has a return that none of my stocks on Wall Street could ever match." He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the room. "And that progress is intrinsically linked to the environment he lives in, an environment of safety, of trust. The person who cares for him, Clara, is the primary asset in this process. Your comments, Beatrice, have created a liability, a toxic environment that directly affects my son." The headmistress began to stammer. "Mr. Covington, I assure you, the reputation of our students and their families is—" Arthur cut her off with a simple raise of his hand. "Reputation is an intangible asset, headmistress, and like any asset, it must be protected. My wealth, my businesses, are associated with institutions that value integrity. Integrity is a form of capital that cannot be measured in dollars or euros. And what happened here was a breach of integrity." He finally turned fully to Beatrice, his gaze cutting. "You use slander and gossip for your own interests. That wasn't just cruel, it was bad business, because you bet against the wrong person." Beatrice turned pale. "I was only worried about Leo," she tried, her voice weak. "No," Arthur cut her off. "You were worried about yourself. As of today, I demand two things. First, a formal apology to Clara. Second, that you never address her, me, or my son again. If I hear a single whisper, a single insinuation, you can consider all my financial support for this institution to be under review. And believe me, the cash flow will feel the impact. Am I clear?" It wasn't a question. It was a decree. Beatrice, defeated and humiliated, could only nod, unable to form a word. Arthur stood up, adjusted his shirt sleeve, and took the handles of Leo's wheelchair. "Have a good day," he said, and walked out of the office, leaving the ruins of Beatrice's arrogance behind. In the hallway, Leo looked up at his father, and for the first time, there was no fear or uncertainty. There was admiration. He squeezed Arthur's hand, a gesture of complicity that was worth more than any inheritance. Upon arriving home, the first thing Arthur did was call Clara. "It's handled," he said, his voice devoid of any triumph, just a statement of fact. Clara, who had spent the entire morning with her heart in her throat, felt tears of relief well up in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, the word laden with an emotion that went far beyond gratitude. It was something deeper, a recognition that he had seen her, defended her, valued her. That afternoon, the atmosphere in the mansion was transformed. The invisible barrier between them had dissolved. They laughed together when Leo managed to stack 4 wooden blocks, a new record. Later, as they had coffee on the veranda, a comfortable silence settled between them. Arthur's gaze on her was warm, open, and Clara felt she could finally breathe. It was then that the housekeeper brought the mail. Among the bills and investment fund reports was a pearlescent envelope from the school. Arthur opened it. It was an invitation to Family Day, an annual event. At the bottom of the invitation, a special note announced a short presentation by the kindergarten students, where each child was to say what they loved most about their family. Arthur's face lit up with a pure, contagious optimism, the optimism of a man who felt he had finally taken control of his life. "Clara, look at this," he said, his eyes shining with pride. "It will be the perfect chance for Leo, for our warrior to show everyone how strong he is, how much he's progressed." He was smiling, oblivious to the shadow of doubt that crossed her face. Clara looked at the invitation, the elegant paper feeling cold in her hand. Her heart tightened with a bad feeling. That stage, in front of all those people, wouldn't be a podium. It would be a trap. Arthur's excitement about the school event was infectious, but for Clara, each day that brought the presentation closer was another step toward a cliff. She saw the same classmates who had once mocked Leo now approaching him in the schoolyard, encouraged by parents who, after Arthur's show of power, saw an alliance with the Covington family as good business. The smiles were fake, the words of encouragement hollow. "You're going to do great, Leo," they'd say, but their eyes held the same old contempt, now veiled by a layer of hypocrisy. Leo, naive and eager for acceptance, seemed to believe the sudden change in his peers' attitude. He would smile back, a crooked, hopeful smile that broke Clara's heart. She tried to warn Arthur, to express her apprehension subtly. "Mr. Covington, maybe it's too much pressure for Leo. He's still getting used to speaking. What if he freezes on stage?" she argued one evening. Arthur, blinded by paternal pride and his recent victory, dismissed her concerns. "Nonsense, Clara. He's doing so well. It will be a moment of triumph for him. I'll be there, you'll be there. The event sponsors, who are important business partners of mine, will also be there. It will be perfect." The mention of sponsors sounded like an alarm in Clara's head. For him, the event wasn't just about Leo. It was also about image, about consolidating his position, about presenting to the world an heir who was overcoming adversity. The trap, she realized, wasn't just for the boy, it was for the father, too. The headmistress and the other parents, sensing an opportunity, were inflating expectations, turning the small presentation into a spectacle centered on the miracle of Arthur Covington's son. The pressure on Leo's small shoulders was immense. The day of the event arrived, gray and humid. Leo was dressed in a new outfit, but his eyes lacked their usual sparkle. He was quiet, anxious. Clara tried to soothe him, whispering words of encouragement, but she felt her words weren't reaching him. In the crowded school auditorium, the air was thick with expensive perfume and high expectations. Arthur, seated in the front row, radiated confidence, greeting business partners and other influential parents. He looked like a king in his court, displaying the rarest gem in his treasure, his recovering son. When it was Leo's turn, a heavy silence fell over the audience. The teacher helped him position his wheelchair at the center of the stage. The blinding lights hit him, and he blinked, disoriented. He searched for his father's face in the crowd and found it, smiling and giving him a thumbs up. Leo took a deep breath, clutching the microphone with two trembling hands. What I like most," he began, his voice a faint thread, almost inaudible. The audience leaned forward. He paused, swallowing hard. The silence stretched, becoming heavy, hostile. He glanced at the row of classmates sitting at the edge of the stage. One of them, the same boy who had led the taunts in the hallway weeks before, made a face, mimicking Leo's paralyzed expression. It was a quick gesture, nearly invisible to the audience, but to Leo it was like a punch. The air fled his lungs. The microphone slipped from his sweaty hands, falling to the floor with a dull thud that echoed through the auditorium. The words died in his throat. Panic froze his face into a mask of terror. He looked to his father, his eyes pleading for rescue, and the look Arthur gave him back was the final blow. It wasn't a look of compassion. It was a look of disappointment, a fleeting glimpse, but one Leo saw with terrible clarity. Arthur's smile wilted, replaced by an expression of public embarrassment. It was only a second, but in that second, Leo's world fell apart. Humiliated and betrayed by his own father's gaze, he hung his head, silent tears streaming down his face, as a murmur of pity and discomfort spread through the audience. The night that was meant to be a triumph had turned into the deepest and loneliest of defeats. The ride home was a silent torture. The interior of the luxury car, normally a sanctuary of comfort, became a vacuum chamber where the air was heavy with shame and pain. Arthur drove with a mechanical stiffness, his eyes fixed on the road, but his mind was trapped in the auditorium, replaying in a cruel loop the second his son's smile had shattered because of him. That look, the look of a broken heart seeking refuge and finding a wall, it was the worst mistake of his life, a failure of character so profound that none of his assets could ever compensate for it. He could smell his son's humiliation as if it were toxic smoke filling the vehicle. Beside him, Clara said nothing. She was in the back with Leo, her body curved over the wheelchair, protecting him with an embrace that was as much a comfort to the boy as it was a barrier against the man at the wheel. Her silence was the most eloquent of accusations. When they arrived at the mansion, Clara took Leo directly to his room. Arthur remained behind in the lavish living room, feeling like a stranger in his own home. The art objects, the designer furniture, all seemed to mock him, silent witnesses to his bankruptcy as a father. He could hear his son's muffled sobs from upstairs, and each sound was a stab to his conscience. He waited, not knowing for what. Perhaps an explosion of anger from Clara, a confrontation. But when she came down, her face was pale, exhausted, her eyes empty of any emotion. She stopped at a safe distance from him. "Mr. Covington, I can no longer work for you," she said, her voice quiet but unbreakable. The sentence hit him with the force of a physical impact. "What? Clara, don't be hasty. I made a terrible mistake. I can fix this." "No, you can't," she replied, and for the first time, a spark of pain shone in her eyes. "There's nothing to fix. I thought my presence was helping him, but I was wrong. I am the problem. I'm the point of contention. As long as I'm here, Leo will be caught in the crossfire between your pride and what other people think." She took a deep breath, her voice trembling slightly. Today, on that stage, he wasn't looking for a sponsor or a businessman. He was looking for his father. And you were ashamed of him. I saw it in your eyes, and most importantly, he saw it too. Every word was a truth he couldn't deny. He tried to argue, to offer more money, to promise to change. But his usual resources were useless against her resolve. "I don't want your money. I just want him to be okay," she said, her voice breaking. "And he won't be okay with me here, reminding him every day of what happened today." She turned to leave, heading for the small service door that led to her quarters. "Clara, please," he begged, desperation breaking through his controlled facade. She stopped, but didn't turn around. "My things are packed. I'll be gone in an hour." He took a step toward her, his hand outstretched, but she moved away. That small motion was the final rejection. She left without looking back. Arthur stood motionless, listening to her footsteps fade, and then the soft click of a closing door. He looked around the empty room and felt a cold that no heating system could ward off. He had lost. Not a negotiation, not a deal. He had lost the only person who had taught him how to feel again. Minutes later, he went up to Leo's room. The boy was awake, staring at the wall, and on the nightstand, where a colorful drawing had once been, There was now only an empty space. She had taken with her the only proof that she had once been this boy's protector. He stood frozen in the middle of the lavish room, a billionaire who owned the world but had just lost his one true treasure. The days following Clara's departure were long, grey, and silent. The mansion, once filled with the echoes of Leo's rare laughter and the nanny's warm presence, became an opulent mausoleum. Arthur's money, once the solution to all problems, proved utterly useless. He bought the most expensive toys, hired the most renowned chefs to prepare Leo's favorite foods, but nothing worked. The boy refused to eat. The physical therapist came, but he remained motionless. The speech therapist tried, but he remained in a stubborn, desolate silence. He had regressed to a state of apathy that was more frightening than any crying fit. Clara's absence was not just an emotional void. It was a physical vacuum that sucked all the color and life from the house. Arthur spent hours sitting in the hallway outside his son's closed bedroom door, a dethroned billionaire, powerless against the pain he had caused. One night, tormented by insomnia, Arthur got up and wandered aimlessly through the house. His feet led him, almost of their own accord, to the modest room at the back. The room that had been Clara's. It was impeccably clean, sterile, as if she had never existed. But on the small desk, left behind, was a worn children's book. He picked it up. The pages were soft from constant use. As he flipped through it, something fell to his feet, a small, folded piece of paper. It was a drawing, a simple sketch, made with colored pencils, of a boy in a wheelchair holding the hand of a stick-figure woman under a smiling sun. Below, in Leo's shaky handwriting, was the word protector. The drawing he thought she had taken, she had left it behind. That crumpled piece of paper was more valuable than all the stocks in his portfolio, a testament to the bond he had destroyed. In that moment, regret hit him with the force of a tidal wave, breaking his last defenses and leaving him completely naked in his misery. The final catalyst came in the form of a phone call from the school, an urgent meeting. Concerned about Leo's absence and sudden regression, they wanted to discuss support measures. Arthur went, not as the powerful benefactor, but as a grieving father. As he walked down the hallway where it all began, he saw the scene replay in his mind. Clara, arms outstretched, a human shield, her courage, his cowardice. In the headmistress's office, as she spoke of specialized programs and new therapies, the words buzzed in his ears without making sense. He looked out the window and saw children playing in the yard. The solution wasn't there in that sterile room, in any expensive program. The solution was humility. It was admitting his mistake absolutely. The solution was her. He stood up in the middle of the headmistress's sentence, the gesture so abrupt she fell silent, shocked. "Excuse me. I have an urgent matter to attend to." He didn't go to his office. He went straight home, to Leo's room. The boy was sitting in his chair, watching the rain begin to fall outside. Arthur knelt in front of him, a gesture he had never made before. He didn't try to justify himself. He spoke with a raw honesty. "Son, I was a fool. I messed up, and now we're going to fix it. Together, we're going to get her." For the first time in days, a flicker of interest appeared in Leo's eyes. Arthur didn't call the driver. He lifted his son into his arms, felt the fragile weight of his body, and placed him in the car. The drive to Revere was a pilgrimage. When he arrived at the simple house, he didn't hesitate. He got Leo out of the car, settled him in his wheelchair, and pushed it along the wet sidewalk to the front door. Clara's sister answered, her face set in an expression of mistrust. Then Clara appeared behind her. Her eyes widened in shock, the pain of their separation etched on her face. Arthur said nothing. There were no promises, no flowers, no offers of money. He just pushed Leo's chair forward a little. The boy lifted his tear-streaked face to her with a monumental effort that contracted every muscle in his small body. He pieced together the words that came from the bottom of his soul. "Clara, thank you for taking care of me." The voice was trembling, the sentence broken, but the message was a symphony. Clara fell to her knees, sobs shaking her body, and hugged him fiercely. And there, on the threshold of that simple door, under the light rain, Arthur wept, silently. For the first time in 20 years, he hadn't won anything back. He had simply surrendered to the only truth that mattered. The rain falling that afternoon seemed to wash away not only the grime from the Revere streets, but also the open wounds in the souls of the three. Clara, still on her knees, hugged Leo as if trying to merge with him, to absorb his pain and give him all her strength. Arthur remained standing, a drenched spectator of his own redemption, allowing the scene to unfold without his interference. This moment wasn't about him. It was about the bond he had nearly destroyed, and now, miraculously, had a chance to help rebuild. Clara's sister, overcome by the raw emotion of the scene, invited them in. The house was small, but impeccably clean, and the smell of brewed coffee hung in the air, an aroma of home and welcome, sitting in the modest living room, surrounded by family portraits and small knickknacks. The opulence of the Covington mansion seemed like a distant, artificial world. Clara's return was not immediate, nor was it negotiated like a business contract. It was a slow transition, built on gestures rather than words. In the following days, Arthur began making the trip to Revere every day. He didn't ask Clara to come back. He brought Leo to see her. He took part in the impromptu physical therapy sessions Clara conducted with the boy in the small backyard. He drank the strong coffee her mother offered and listened to family stories, learning about the life of sacrifice and unconditional love that had shaped the woman he admired. He found himself shedding, layer by layer, the armor of the multimillionaire, revealing the man beneath. He learned to listen, to observe, to be present in a way he never had been before. He was no longer the boss visiting the employee. He was a man learning how to be part of a family. One day, while watching Clara and Leo laugh together as they tried to bake a cake, the entire kitchen dusted with flour, he felt a peace that no successful acquisition had ever given him. It was then that he made his offer. "Clara," he said, his voice calm, "I don't want you to come back to work for me. I want you to come home, to our home, as part of our family." It wasn't a job offer. It was a plea. Leo stopped laughing and looked at her, his eyes filled with an almost painful hope. Clara looked around, at her house, her family, and then at the man and the boy who had become her family, too. She smiled, a smile that lit up the entire room. "We're already home," she said. A few more weeks passed. Clara returned to the mansion, but the dynamics were completely different. She was no longer the nanny. She was the heart of the home. She and Arthur built their relationship slowly, with the delicacy of someone treading on sacred ground. The love that grew between them was quiet, expressed in hands that touched while pushing the wheelchair, in glances that met over Leo's head as he recounted a new discovery, in shared coffees on the veranda at dawn. He watched her with a reverent tenderness. She fought against the fear of letting herself go, but his sincerity demolished her defenses day by day. At the next school event, a spring festival, no one expected Leo to participate. But with Clara's hand holding his and his father's proud, calm gaze in the audience, he went on stage. He didn't make a speech. He just said, his voice clear and firm, "Thank you to my family." The audience rose in genuine applause. Arthur walked over to Clara and, in front of everyone, took her hand. There was no luxury in the gesture, no defiance. There was only truth. The school hallway, once a stage for cruelty and redemption, now witnessed the beginning of a future. A man who learned that the greatest wealth is the ability to love without fear, A woman who discovered her worth needed no proof, and a boy who, with his silent courage, taught them both the true meaning of being rich. And in that same hallway where cruel laughter once echoed, the silence now had the soft, enduring sound of peace.